Good. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic. Very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Jen. Um, there was a little bit of mention of the so-called plain language version of the Big Book before the meeting started, and uh, I may be on my own on this one, but I think the Big Book's pretty plain. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when you drink, you have little control over the amount you take, then you're probably alcoholic. That's pretty plain to me. And that's the essence of my alcoholism. When I drink way too much, and the consequences don't stop me. I first started getting serious consequences from my drinking when I was in 1989 when I was a teenager, and over the 4 years after that, as the consequences piled up and up and up, I it didn't dent my drinking, didn't stop me. It would stop me for a few days maximum, and then I'd start again. I have a mind which will take me back to alcohol. I have a body that cannot but crave more. The reason I know that, uh, sometimes people say, well, I drank because I like the effect. Well, I did, but when I didn't like the effect, I did it anyway. I remember once I was stuck somewhere and I loathed whiskey. I hated the taste of it. Other drinks were my drinks. So I loathed whiskey, and all there was whiskey. And I remember having to have a bar of chocolate to drink the whiskey, drink down a big gulp, and then immediately put a piece of chocolate in my mouth to take the taste away. I would drink when I didn't like it. I remember getting drunk. It would be 9 o'clock in the evening. I'd be miserable. I'd be in a bar. I wasn't talking to anyone. I was too drunk to really hold a conversation anyway, and I was having a rotten time. And a regular person at that point would call it quits and go home. Not me. I've got a few more hours to go. And sometimes I couldn't wait until it was done so that I could go home. I had to wait till it let go. Um, it's very clear that the amount I drank was not because I wanted to. The amount I drank was because, well, that's the way I drink. And if that's the way I drink, that's the way I would always drink. So I must never have another alcoholic drink. Very, very clear. So that powerless after the first drink. The powerless over the first drink, powerless before the first drink. It talks in the big book uh, about the fact we're drinking against our will. It never felt like that. Every first drink I had seemed like a terribly good idea at the time. If it hadn't, it would have been very difficult to actually do it, but it seemed like the right thing to do. So I can't judge that by the feeling. What I can do is look at the consequences, the hospital visits, the increasing physical debilitation, even in my early 20s, my inability to get through the day physically, that just being so ill from the night before, being unable, my mind didn't work. My mind worked very well when I was 16, 17. It did not work at all when I was 21. Things which had been easy and straightforward when I was 16 were not straightforward when I was 21. I was divorced from reality. I had no friends left. I hadn't had friends for a long time by the time I finished drinking. None of this contrived to consistently keep me away from the first drink. And there were times where my resolution felt absolutely firm, and yet I would discover myself drunk. And that started to terrify me. That was in the beginning of 1993. My last drink was July 1993. It was 6 months before my first meeting of AA. and my last drink. And that is not because I think continuing to drink is a necessary part of one's AA journey. And although I liked AA well enough, from the first meeting I recognised, you know what, I'm going to be in AA forever. If I'm going to stay sober, I definitely need help. That was clear. And I could see the people around me, people who had been there for decades. I thought, well, I can think of worse fates than this. This is absolutely fine. I can deal with it. But I reserve the right, in accordance with one of the little slogans that they had, take what you want and leave the rest. Well, I did. It doesn't work. Um, because my own judgment will take me to a drink. That is why I am here, is because my own judgment is unreliable and volatile. 1 minute I would want to be sober, the next minute I would want to be drunk. You leave me in charge. You leave me to decide which bits I'm going to take, which bits I'm going to leave. You're asking the problem to make a decision about which parts of the solution to adopt. So I adopted the bits which were convenient and pleasant, essentially the social aspects, the human interaction side of AA. But I wasn't uh, interested in any uh, formal program. And as soon as I started to be interested in it, I immediately carved out the God business. And I'm going to cut a long story short. It's a relatively short meeting. It's a relatively short pitch. It's not an hour-long pitch. So I'm going to save you the full story of uh, how I first came into contact with a power greater than myself. But the short version is this. I was screwed. Nothing anyone in AA was saying could get through to me, and I had to reach out to God in order to stay sober. I reached out, I was kept sober, and I knew from that point onwards that I need never drink again. I now have something that can be resorted to at any time. And looking back, my resistance to God, I dressed it up as all sorts of theological concerns, and I thought myself very modern for not believing in God, very with it, very up to date, very of the zeitgeist. But the real reason why I objected to the notion of God was this, I was talking to someone about this morning. I'm taking through the steps at any given time. I'm always taking a lot of people through. That's the chief way in which I work for God, which is what keeps me sober. I work for God, that keeps me sober. How do I do that? Sponsoring others. And there are other odds and ends as well. But back to the point, I was talking to someone this morning about this question of God's will. The reason it says in step 11, praying only for knowledge of God's will and the power to carry that out, is that that is the implementation of step 3. To turn my will and life over to God means to undertake for every moment of every day for the rest of my life to seek God's will and then to endeavour to carry that out. And God's will, the bit of God's will which is my concern is what God would have me do. God's will in terms of outcomes, results, the rest of the world, other people, none of my business. The little bit of God's will which is my business is God's will for me. Um, and what is clear now is that I'm being asked to adopt God's will. Instead of what? Instead of my will. There we go. This was the problem. To take step 3 and then to follow it all the way through to steps 11 and 12 would mean saying, my will no longer relevant. When? At any moment for the rest of my life. In other words, what I want ceases to be relevant. It's not a factor. End of. Now, the wanting machine inside me is still there. And my job over the last 31 odd years in AA has been to say, no, no. And to basically do that uh, day in, day out. Now, it's a lot quieter. It's a lot less imperious. Occasionally, it slips through and it gets its own way. But the problem with God is that It represents a challenge to me doing what I want to do. It also represents a challenge to my notion of myself. Uh, to have an identity at all is to have an image of myself. God hasn't asked me to have an image of myself. Chuck Chamberlain is very good on this. He says, he talks about self-esteem. He says he can't imagine what having an image of himself would add to his life in any way at all. In step 11, when I'm praying only for knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry that out, that means anything outside of that is none of my business. Tradition 10. No opinion on outside matters. What are the outside matters? Other people, the world, past, the future, me, my life, and the results. And if I keep my mind successfully off those, a couple of those need the occasional glance in order to work out what to do, a little bit of inventory, a little bit of planning. But essentially, those areas are outside the scope of my uh, responsibility. They're not in my, as we would say in this country, bailiwick. They're not in my purview. That they shouldn't be my business. When I keep my mind out of those, I have a good day. I've got time and energy for doing things that I should be doing. In other words, it frees up the whole day to keep my mind out of those. But that is precisely where my mind wants to go. It wants to survey the world and set it to rights. It wants to survey your life and set it right. It wants to do anything but forget about itself and get on with the work that is in front of me. And my activities during the day essentially involve service, and my job is service. Running the household is service. Service is service. Sponsorship is service. I'm not serving myself. I'm not serving other people. My job is to serve God. So there's service, there's prayer, there's meditation, there's study of spiritual matters and readings and listenings. And then there's appreciation. I get to enjoy the world that is given to me. And that is the point at which I'm to pay attention, is when I'm blessed with something to appreciate and enjoy. But I have to give up a lot of what my ego, my lower self, my evil inclination will consider to be the prizes of life, the Christmas trees, the glitter, and the things which make me me. And that's the worst thing. I have to give up me to be the child of God. And there's some sort of radical democracy, I think, in AA, which is extraordinary in any organization. There's a line, I've got someone at the moment, a sponsee, who's in, we're talking through the prefaces. And in one of the prefaces, it talks about a wholesale miracle. And that's very interesting. You see, my ego would be interested in me having a special miracle for me, a special little thing that God has done for me and not for anyone else. Wholesale miracle? You mean a cash and carry miracle? You mean the same miracle as everyone else? You mean I get to be just an ordinary alcoholic who has an ordinary spiritual experience, forgets about themselves and gets on with their job in life, finds their place in the world, however august or however humble? That's not attractive. And I remember that line in the 12 and 12, a worker amongst workers. For years I read that thinking, not interested. I want to be, as it talks about in the same book, at the top of the heap, the top of the pile, the number one man, until I became so toxified by my attempt to form and establish an identity in the world sober, that I thought, you know what, I want to be invisible. This is the principle of tradition 12. I want to be nothing. I want to not be here and then live. And it's a much more comfortable way of living, I have to say. Um, so my problem with God in step 2 was not really theological. It wore theological garb, as I do. People trot out all of the usual things which I won't rehearse here, and I did those as well. The usual sort of atheist things. If you're atheist, fine. If it's working for you, good luck. I'm not interested in converting anyone at all. and whatever is working for you, I'm absolutely thrilled. But my self-destructive capabilities are, first of all, so powerful, and secondly, so acutely pressing as a problem. In other words, that self-destruction could take me out today, literally. I need the power of the universe, I really do, to give me an alternative to self as a way of governing my life. And I was fine for a long time with the notion of God as the spirit of the universe and some sort of lovely, benign, but distant and ineffable and nebulous energy out there, just a sort of general cloud of loveliness. That was fine for a while. But I discovered that really after a few years to be a very lonely thing. I need a higher power. I need a God that I can talk to and that I believe can literally talk back and tell me things. Now, it doesn't come in the form of hearing voices in the room. And if you hear voices, there may or may not be a, legitimate reason for that. God's will comes to me in different ways, but I have to trust that God's will can be articulated. And the word will is so interesting. Uh, for something to have a will, it must have a mind. For a higher power, for me to have a relationship with something with a will, I'm having a relationship with something with a mind, to recognize that God has a mind, intellectual capabilities, and conversational capabilities, and can hear when I speak, and can understand when I speak. I'm not talking to myself. I'm not talking to a cloud. There is a personhood there. And in We Agnostics, there's this passage about taking a simple attitude towards that power. And the simple attitude that I'm to take towards that power is, you're in charge. I'm not. I don't even have to have a perception or an understanding of me, of what is going on around me, of my day, of my life. I need ask you, God, only for, what do you want me to do today? Again, it's a position of subservience. The attitude is one of complete willingness to do anything with no resistance to whatever comes down the tubes. If you ask me to do it, God, I will do it. If it runs against the values of the world, fine, I'll do it. If it puts other people's noses out of joint, now one doesn't want to go around being a jerk unnecessarily, and it isn't carte blanche to do so, but nonetheless, doing the right thing will not please everyone, will not make everyone happy. It will raise eyebrows. People will wonder what you're doing and why. And I've had to have the courage to live like that. Um, so the problem with step two was that I wanted to be in charge. And it was only when I saw the catastrophic results of me being in charge, both drunk and sober, full of self, occupying 9/10 of my entire universe, that I said, you know what? There must be a better way. My tolerance for pain was impressive, but not infinite. And at one point, I thought, you know what? I've had it. I don't care. Do whatever you want with me. And there was an old bloke in London, AA, died a number of years ago. And he said, there are people who are worried about what's round the corner. And he said, I'm not worried about what's round the corner. I know what's round the corner. My higher power is round the corner. So whatever else is round there, I'm going to be all right, because whatever happens, however the future turns out, however I'm doing, whether I am doing well or I am doing badly, whatever my circumstances look like, God is with me. And the big lesson of AA is how I feel is 100% down to my relationship of subservience to God. It's not down to whether or not I'm getting my own way. It's down to that. When I'm at peace with God, I'm at peace with everything. That's all I've got. Thank you, Jen, for asking me to share.